Oh, it's your recording. I'm not actually recording. Anyway, I'll leave it.
Hello, and a very good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Max Scott. I'm the publisher, and with me is Adel Darwish, possibly at the top left of your screen, and Michael Binyon on the other side at the top. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'm very excited to present today something around the launch of Alexandria Adieu, which is a fascinating new book by Adel Darwish. We have already enjoyed two very cheerful launch events here in London. But they were both occasions where our guest was standing and it wasn't really quite the forum for any discussion. And my hope today is that rather than having a webinar where someone presents some ideas, rather we invite your input and to share ideas and thoughts on the subject of the book with two immensely qualified people on this. First, of course, is Adel Darwish, whom I'm sure you'll know, father of the house, as many know him. And when you say the house, meaning the most senior house in the world, and being the most senior journalist, Adel has some stature as a reporter and a deep knowledge of the subject. And also Michael Binyon, of course, well known as the lead writer of the Times and an exceedingly insightful journalist for many years. Probably enough from me. I was going to hand over to Michael, who will say a few words. And it's not our intention to lecture people, but simply to share a discussion with you. So we really would love input and ideas and queries. So without further ado, Michael, please.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Max. It's really just to introduce the book. If you have seen it already, you'll know the huge variety of part memoir, part lament, part celebration, part historic memories of a great city that has seen better days. It's a sort of tragic sweet book because it's very amusing. It gives lots of little insights into what life was like in Alexandria's heyday in the 1940s and 1950s, but it also tells of the sad decline after so many of the inhabitants left. I mean, the Greeks were more or less pushed out after Nasser came to power, and most of them emigrated, and there was a huge Greek community there. The Jews all were pushed out more unceremoniously. They were basically expelled, particularly, of course, after the creation of Israel. And then the Suez crisis made things even worse for all the foreigners. So they all left, and Alexandria became just a big city, hugely overpopulated, and sadly has become rather shabby. It's lost its charm, it's lost its international culture, it's lost some of the élan and the sort of feeling that it was a capital of the Eastern Mediterranean. And it's now, as Adel saw when he went back there several times, just a big, rather shabbily built city with a few little areas of memento of what it once was. And in the book, Adel takes us down those steps of where he'd been in the city, what it reminded him of. Very much, he takes us along the tram routes that he used to know, and made something of the funny names that the tram stops all have, ranging from diplomats, historical figures, Cleopatra, I mean, all sorts of different people who had influenced Alexandria's history. And in fact, the book raises all sorts of interesting questions. It's part memoir, part historical, part biography, but it's also quite a shrewd political analysis of what's happened to Egypt, to Alexandria in particular, and to the Western understanding of this city. And Adel very helpfully summarized a number of themes that perhaps when you come to talk to him or ask your questions or indeed make your contributions, we might think would be quite useful. I mean, one is particularly the identity of the city as distinct from Egypt, he says Alexandria had a life of its own that wasn't really the same as the life of the wider country, Egypt. It even had a sort of dialect or a separate language that drew heavily, of course, on the Arabic, but was, to many people, like almost a separate language influenced by its history and culture. So I think it'd be interesting to hear from Adel what he means by that. He looks very much at the clash of Western civilization and Islamism. The expulsion of foreigners reduced the influence of those from abroad, and at the same time, the growth of fundamentalist Islam has changed the character as it has of not only Egypt, but much of the Middle East. He looks at the relationship between Alexandria and the West, in particular, France and Britain. Britain for obviously historical reasons, and France for cultural reasons, and looks to see also what influences places like Italy have had on the architecture of the city and other nearby European countries who've all passed through Alexandria and have influenced it. So its diverse mixture of cultures and themes is quite interesting. Then, of course, I mean, there's the whole wartime thing where the Germans were pretty active as spies in Alexandria, and there was quite a small clique of pro-Nazi sympathizers there. They didn't really get anywhere, but it'd be interesting to hear from Adel what wartime experience did to Alexandria. And of course, the other key thing is, what is the lingering influence of ancient history, of the Romans, of Cleopatra, of course, of the great ruins that lie under the sea of Alexandria, and to what extent have they been forgotten or recognized or rediscovered and still have an influence? So these are just some of the themes that come out in his memoir. He also, of course, talked about the great heyday of the cultural figures, people like E.M. Forster, who was active in the city, working there, fell in love with a tram driver and seemed to have gone up and down the tramways pursuing his love lost on the trams. Kafafi, another gay guy who made a name for himself in Alexandria, published incredible poetry in Greek, but was very much an Alexandrian. And of course, the biographer in some ways of the city, Lawrence Durrell, who came right at the end of Alexandria's glory and is to some extent a bit like Adel, lamenting a time that's just slipping away right now. So those are some of the themes. Adel, I don't know if you want to pick up any one of them straight away or throw it straight open to the audience here if you have any questions to put directly to Adel.
I'd probably thank Michael, because Michael has been involved with us for over 6 months now. Very kindly read the book before going to print. Before Christmas, he wrote the forwarding, and he's been in every launch, and he really summarized it quite well. I probably would not much to add, except just adding that I really was influenced very much, not influenced, or rather the structure of the book, where there's so many writers and documents, and if you look at the end notes, the amount of citations and references I got, and interviews I had with people like the first president of Egypt, General Naguib, like the Mrs. Sadat, like the man who was fighting with the Nazi sympathies, Hassan Azzad, who was actually fighting with Sadat, shooting at the British and so on. There was a film I was making back in the 1980s and interviewed all these characters. And in addition to that, I looked at a huge number of documentation. But actually, in the actual structure itself was very much the triangle of Kafafi, Forster, and Durrell, because Durrell's been accused by the left, the Anglo-Saxon European left, of fictionalizing Alexandria, which is not true, actually. He was sort of the storyteller of Alexandria, while Forster was actually the curator, because Forster started his book, Alexandria, History and the Guide, in the 1920s. Because he was a curator of the Greco-Roman Museum when it was moved into a bigger place, which is current place now in Alexandria. So he was writing all the notes, and from there he developed the book. And of course, Kafafi as being the soul of Alexandria. His poetry actually been translated into Egyptian and classical Arabic, as well as, of course, into English. I'm sure some of it's been translated into French. I mean, Edmund Keeley is the best one who translated Kirvoss into English. So that's actually where my ideas come from. Darwish's effect, the way I saw it as sort of the storyteller of the city, that you go into one place and you have these layers of history and many characters and places come to the same place. That's just why I want to see why these three characters are very important and thread going through the whole book. But I'll stop here, and I think I throw the floor whoever wants to go first.
Max, will you introduce people who put up their hand and have something
yes,
to
I
say
think that might be the smartest way, actually.
Yeah.
Let's see. So if anyone would like to put up a hand,
It's Cathy, Cathy, fellow Alexandrian.
There we go. Hello, Cathy.
Hello. Bonjour, bonsoir, Monsieur Adel. This is Alexandria speak,
Yes.
quoted. Exactly. I mean, this fusion of languages, of cultures. I sailed with Monsieur Darwish's book, as I mentioned to him. He sailed me through in the different array of the Mediterranean. I saw my childhood, my adolescence. Of course, I'm an Alexandria born, raised, studied there. I'm an engineer, but I studied English literature as a hobby. So I really did sail. There were tears, there was laughter. It was deeply historical on all levels, but with the fusion and this interwoven way of the biographical side, with all the details, the fragrances. I could smell the villas, my own, and the way he described it. I mean, I was really drawn to this book like a magnet. I've read almost all the books about written memoirs, whatever, about Egypt in general, Alexandria, but that particular, without, trying, it's genuine what I'm saying, that was a deep, deep Alexandrology, the science, as Monsieur Adel mentions, the word Alexandrology, if ever it's going to be taught, this is the book really that should be in the curriculum. It has all levels, and it just took us very, very smoothly from the very first chapter. And then there was like a piano tempo, very, very piano, and then forte, the crescendo of all the history and the politics, and then again, very, very smoothly ending with the gods abandoning Alexandria. I mean, and I will just say as well, I'll quote from the city, we will not find another country, and we will not find another shore. Alexandria will haunt us. The city will haunt us. Thank you, Monsieur Darwish, for this jewel, which made me sail. And I'm back on the shore with all these beautiful memories of childhood and adolescence. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I should add here, Cathy was actually quoting two things, several poetry I put in the book. The one who found no other shore, you will always come back to the city, is actually a poem by Kirvoss, and I think it's in the end of the last section about identity and language. It's called The City, and every Alexandrian in the diaspora carries it within his or her heart. The other one, The Gods Abandoned Alexandria, is actually a title I chose for the epilogue, which Cathy said made her cry. I get emotional every time I read it myself. And it's a poem by Kirvoss about the last days before Mark Antony commits suicide when the Egyptian army deserts him and he finds himself on his own, and said And it's actually the God Abandons Antony. And I used the title, The Gods Abandoned Alexandria, in my last night in Alexandria in 2012. And as I actually walked through the city, I use his poem, At the clock strikes midnight, I walk through the streets of Alexandria, and you hear all of that, and it's going through it. That's what Cathy is referring to. I think I will welcome Ambassador Mark Hambley. I think he wants to go next.
Very, very beautiful, very moving, actually, I've got to say, interpreting. Yeah, thank you. Yes, Mark, please, fire away.
Thank you. Yeah, Adel, it's wonderful seeing all of you today. And Adel, I can't thank you enough, my friend, for writing this wonderful, wonderful retrospective on this great city, the Paris d'Orient. It's remarkable encapsulation of the city which all of us love so much. I'm afraid, Frank Wisner would come down, our great ambassador in Egypt, where I was there about 30 years ago, would come down to Alexandria, and he would ask me always to find little excursions we could take around the great city. And I used D.M. Forster's guide to Alexandria a bit to follow around where Isadora Duncan did some of her dancing, and followed some of the traces of Gaddafi's life in the city, etc. It was great fun doing that. I also remember a song by the late artist Dalida, speaking about Alexandria, called Ahsan Nas, the best people. I think that's certainly something which I'll always remember. And thanks much for writing this book, Adel. It's a treasure. I'll put it up in my library and hopefully get a sense of the city. But I'm afraid a lot of it has been lost, but the essence is still there. Thank you, my friend.
Well, thank you. I think the song that Ambassador Mark Hambley, who is actually the Consul General of the United States diplomatic mission in Alexandria. That was in the 1980s, is that right?
Yes, 1986, 1989, yeah, wonderful year.
1989, yeah. Now, the Saint Abul Abbas is actually, he, like all the saints, Muslim saints in Alexandria, none of them is Alexandria, none of them is Egyptians. They're all either Andalusians, came from Spain or from Morocco, and this one I think came from Levant and one from Cyprus. But none of them were actually Alexandrian, because Alexandria didn't have any religion, didn't believe in any religion except love. So, and that saint is the Muslim saint. He's saint of the dock workers and fishermen and the Alexandria United Football Club. And the song is Irul Fath Abul Abbas Iskandriya Ya Ahsan Nas. Hail the Saint Abul Abbas, Alexandrian the best class. So that's the translation of it. That's what
Wonderful.
And the mosque actually was built by an Italian architect, as one of the Italian architects specialized in building mosques.
That's wonderful.
That's very good.
One more question for you, Adel. Do you remember the statue of Zaghloul Pasha, which used to be in Alexandria?
It's still there in the Obelisk Square. Now it's called Zaghloul Square. Yes.
Well, and I remember we were looking. There's another statue of a former governor who was a Armenian.
Yeah, Nomad Pasha. Nomad Pasha.
Yeah.
Outside the Opera House.
We had a wonderful French consul general in Alexandria when I was there. He was a refined scholar, and he asked me, "Do you know what happened to the statue?" And I said, "Well, of course, it was removed during the Nasser era." But one day we went around the city searching for it. We found it actually in a yard of an interior ministry sort of warehouse. There was a backyard with all the old statues which had been taken down, and there it was, right there standing. So it was a great moment for him. We took a picture of it with him. He took it back to France with him, but it was a wonderful.
What can I ask? Whatever happened to those statues afterwards? You any idea? Or?
Well, they were moved off to the storage area. This one was. I don't have the other ones, but this
still there now, perhaps.
I don't know. At the moment, there is there's a former American consul general, the early ones from the 19th century, who died in Alexandria, was buried in the cemetery. At the moment, there's an effort underway to go through that cemetery, which Kate his grave, in order to try and clean it up, maybe even repatriate to the United States or something. A lot of the old history which is being uncovered again and hopefully restored.
On the statues, some of them been reinstated, like Ismail Pasha, the Khedive who built modern Egypt, but they've been put behind Cinema Amir, behind Pastorodis, there in a small place, not where it was in the French gardens. But the story I observed at the statues, all the statues that they were actually during the Royal Alexandria, they were facing Europe, facing the Mediterranean, facing northwest. All the statues that actually been installed in Colonel Nasser's era, all of them turning their back on Europe and facing the southeast.
Wonderful.
I'm not quite sure if that's unconscious, but it's all of that. And I'll let someone else speak now, but I'll tell you the story of Muhammad Ali's statue later on.
Well, let us pass to, now I'm not sure who asked the question. I think possibly Hooky, it was you who perhaps raised your hand first, wasn't it? If you have a minute.
Well, I don't think it was, but it doesn't matter.
Oh, sorry.
A couple of, Anne-Elisabeth will come in a minute. Just a couple of disparate comments. One on Alexandria itself. I don't think it's been specifically brought out in the book or elsewhere that in modern times it has rarely suffered its geography. It can't expand properly because it's got the sea in the north and sand to the south. So with the increase of population, you get the shabbiness that Michael referred to. You're just overpopulated, you're squatter. I read emails all day and I think I hardly ever read a book. But as Michael said, this is a remarkable combination of part memoir, part historical, part personal, part political, part literary. I can't recall reading a book on this same kind of merger of styles. It's really intriguing. I wonder whether Max can say, oh yes, there are lots of books like that. I don't think there are. I think it's quite unique. That's my comment.
It's a very interesting point. And I know Adel and I first discussed it. Adel discussed it. I thought we were doing a biography of the city, and my first instinct was to say, well, I'm going to have to strip the personality out of this because it's not a biography of Alexandria. This is far more than that. And in the end, I utterly gave up on that. And but with joy in my heart, because I think the added ingredient is the mayonnaise in the sandwich that makes it a lot more interesting and exciting. But you're right, it's a bit like gonzo journalism, as I think they call it sometimes, where you inject yourself. I hope that's not offensive, Adel. I don't. But
no, it's not journalism. It's a book.
It's in a sense you inject your own personality, and you don't attempt to be follow a sort of objective chart. And we have another book coming, which I must plug, which is a biography of King Farouk by his daughter, his illegitimate daughter, who lives in Paris now in her 80s. And again, my same instinct with her was to say, well, is it a biography of him?
Yeah, I sent out a message, by the way. Yes.
A mixture of the two. But yeah, so that's the publisher's view. But I don't know, Adel, what you felt when you pulled it together. You weren't conflicted in the same way by that question, or?
No. I mean, that's why the fusion there. And in fact, if I didn't actually cut back, the book would have been double this size. There's so many other things I left out, as Cathy probably would sort of, and when we hear Anne-Elisabeth, what she's going to say, we testify. I mean, Alexandria, I don't know what to stand, so start or when to end. It's a city that is actually became the capital of the culture of the world, as moving from the dark ages into then modern ages, 300s, and then with the Arab invasion in the 7th century, it started its decline. And then it wasn't resurrected again until the 19th century, with again coming back of the Greeks into the city. And then again, second Arab invasion, second Arab conquest, a decline again in it. So the story, I don't know where to start or where to end. I don't know when the second or the second uprising or the second rebirth would come. Maybe, I don't know, I hope we don't have to wait another 1,000 years.
And sorry, should we pass to, I think it's Anne-Elisabeth, isn't it? And so I jumped, my apologies.
First of all, I'd like to thank Adel for finally writing this book, because he was telling me of Alexandria in bits and pieces over the years, and I have to declare an interest, which is that my French and somewhat Russian family, this Russian side of my French-Russian family, one of my aunts married an Alexandrian. And the Alexandrian, whom I always knew from childhood, was a man who, the family history said, brought an entirely different poetry and internationalism into the family. And of course, like Alexandrians, he spoke several languages, each like a mother tongue. He spoke English, French, Arabic, Italian, Greek, and it seemed to him to be normal. And it forced all of us in the family to up our game and learn languages, because we were being shamed by that. But he also had this love of, he was a medical doctor, an ophthalmologist of some repute, and his uncle, also an Alexandrian, had come to France in at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. And they represented to us that cosmopolitan city from Alexander to Cavafy. And my great regret is, of course, that I've never known Alexandria in that time, and the single time when I went, I was in Egypt for a story. It was not what had been described to me. It was like coming in the desert upon the ruins of the temple of the Siva, where Alexander came. Alexander who created the city. What fascinates me about the book is the parallel between the cultural history and the personal history, because if there's one place that requires also the sort of personal experience of the taste of the air, of the dryness, of the smells.
Thank you very much.
Am I interrupting the one?
No,
yes.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Anyway, my question to Adel is, do you think Alexandria will exist in our memories only, and in the poems of Cavafy and everything else? Or is there any possibility one day that not the same city, but something that would be more open to the outside and more sort of in connection with its long past, that can happen again, or are you hopeless?
Thank you very much for your praise. I'm very grateful, and thank you for your support. But this is the lament at the end of the book, and the book ends when I'm actually almost tears in my eyes as the plane leaves Alexandria, and suddenly all this mist and fog rising, and Alexandria is getting smaller. Remind me of our departure back in the 1960 with the ship moving away from Alexandria. And I said, Alexandria Adieu. I don't think we'll see that in our lifetime. There are various forces that would prevent that. One of the main reasons are actually not speaking about anything personal, not changed many names and characters and fused characters for people not to be identified there for their own safety. But that's not just that. It is actually because Alexandria, throughout history, you have cities like Rome or like Paris. Paris will have a character, a soul, a heart, a culture, and so on. When Alexandria in history had all of this, but it also had a mind. And that was another dimension, the mind of the city itself. So you have the fashion, you have the people there, you have the architecture, you have the food, you have to learn the odd word of Ladino if you want to haggle and get the good price in the market. If you don't know Ladino, then they don't take you seriously in haggling in the market and so on. So all of these characters are no longer there. I mean, once the people actually have gone, and the demography, the ethnic cleansing of Alexandria, it changed it. that's one of the reasons I wrote the book as actually history record, but I'm only one of thousands of Alexandria. We need another probably several dozens of books from each different angles. I mean, I write how within the proximity of 10 minutes walk, you move from one world to another. That's even when I lived there in the multi-pot of multi-ethnic Alexandria. I wouldn't say multicultural, I would say multi-ethnic, because it was only one culture, but multi-ethnic there. It's no longer exists now. So I'm not quite sure people need to record that. I mean, this is attempts now in the New Alexandria Library. However, when things translated into classical Arabic or into Egyptian Alexandrian, there's self-censorship and censorship. So I'm not quite sure about the accuracy of the recording there. I'll stop there, let someone else.
I think it's a fascinating point you raised there about the collapse of great cities and the, you know, the disappearance of, and a lot of them then mutate into a pastiche of themselves, don't they? Like, you know, as Vienna has become a sort of version of itself, and it's very tragic that I suppose Alexandria didn't have that opportunity. It dwindled, and I always think there must be other cities, you know, coming up to fill the space, but I can't quite see Dubai evolving to be a place that in a few hundred years' time people look back to as an amazing, exciting melting pot in the same way. I don't think it's Alexandria obviously had a magic ingredient. Anyway, let me pass over to William. Actually, it'd be lovely to hear. Good to see you, and far away.
Hockey's first. I don't know, but
I cede my place, William.
Well, it's William and Veronica. Veronica had a question, William.
You could actually smell the desert as you were sitting out there, and I just wondered if you thought the Durrells wrote that book trilogy, and Lawrence Durrell, who really felt at home there, and I just wonder how you feel he contributed to the old part of the world. Did the Durrells really give something to Alexandria itself? What do you reckon?
And my little point was just that I don't know your Alexandria. The Alexandria I know is today's Alexandria. I've been, well, kind of traveling through it on the way to Libya, or I've went on that amazing train with Ambassador Hambley, whisking up from Cairo. I mean, the Chinese can't build roads. They build atrocious roads, but they can build trains. And it was a super fast train to an Alexandria, which is today's Alexandria. Not a bad place. I mean, it has its charm. There are many little corners and many beautiful things about it. And I know you lament the past, but there is a present that isn't, for us that don't know the past Alexandria, has a great charm. It's a great provincial city now that will perhaps become more important now that this super fast rail link goes to Cairo, which makes it accessible in a way that it perhaps never was. So maybe there is an Alexandria of tomorrow that is there for us all, just to say. But thank you, Adel.
Oh, thank you very much, William. Just for the people who don't know, William Morris and Veronica run the Next Century Foundation, which was founded by his late father, who was actually one of my tutors as a journalist. And he covers the whole region, and Mark Hambley, I'm a member as well, and with hockey. On Veronica's question, because you probably joined us a little bit later, I said that Kapafi was the soul of Alexandria, who mixed the present and the past as a poet, and represented really the heartbeat of Alexandria. Ian Prosser was the curator of Alexandria, but Darrell was the storyteller of Alexandria. He was the one who sings her song. I refer to the book to Alexandria as her and she, not as it, because it's a city with a soul and mind and the heart and character and culture. And Daryl's been accused by the revisionists in writing history that he wrote an imaginary city, which is totally untrue. In fact, he really understood the soul of the city and represented it. And in fact, my analysis in the book that the character Justine represents Alexandria, represents the stages of Alexandria, represents everything in Alexandria in the way she is. She's neither sort of Nilotic, nor Muslim, nor Oriental, nor Levantinian, nor totally European, nor she's a mixture of the Jew and Christianity and Islam and everything. And she's Alexandria, and she moves from sort of confusion and predicting her own death and her own cryptic future, and then she moves into total poverty. And so it is sort of, Daryl is really especially by the left, revisionist, sort of being accused of things which is untrue. In fact, the International Lawrence Daryl Society having their annual conference in about 2 weeks' time, and I'm actually speaking on Alexandria and on Daryl. So that is very, very important. And actually, I learned a lot from him. He introduced Kafafi actually to the English-speaking world. It was apart from academics like Keeley, but it was Kafafi, it was Daryl. On sort of William's point on future, I'm not quite sure, because Alexandria, the point about Alexander the Great instructing Dinocratus to actually build Alexandria, Alexander, he understood whether he really believed he was the son of Ammon, the Egyptian god, or he had his own device of actually mixing the Egyptian gods with the Greek gods as one. And I think it's the latter. He had this, not only this binary culture, he democratized knowledge, because the Egyptians had this thousands and thousands of years of knowledge in mathematics, in architecture, in astrology, in medicine, and so on. But it was a monopoly of the church, the monopoly of the temple. And even the kings, because the word pharaoh actually doesn't mean the king, the word pharaoh means the government palace, was not even allowed to have it. But the democratization of knowledge came by Alexander, because Alexander was actually taught by philosophers, and philosophers in ancient Greece, in Athens, there were celebrities debating the marketplace. So he democratized knowledge, and with the building of Alexandria Library in Minnesota, that actually suddenly this knowledge was for the people. So the importance of Alexandria throughout history, and that happened again. Alexandria was the economic engine that built modern Egypt in the 19th and 20th century. So it's not just sort of a nostalgic lamenting of the past, it's actually having the collapse of Alexandria and then the collapse of the Egyptian economy, because on the eve of the coup, military coup, Britain actually owed Egypt what would be the equivalent now of about maybe 3 billion or something like that. And the Egyptian pound was about £1, I think it's shilling and sixpence of the English pound, worth about $5 and so on. So the collapse of Alexandria collapsed. So it's not just a second provisional city. That was the actual. That was like Toronto for Canada, or like New York. So I'm not quite sure about the future. The future may be okay for tourism and so on. For the expansion, I think the Egyptians still have a way of expanding west. But what they're doing west in the desert, they're actually building holiday resorts, which is not affordable to people. That's why they're building the ugly high-rise blocks. Or someone was asking about the Max, about the book is not available on Amazon. I don't know if Max can tell them why.
I think I just have actually. I just posted a little note on that.
Yeah.
For them.
Sorry to be the killjoy on this one, but it's better if they're sort of told quick that the book is available.
Absolutely. No. Thank you for that. I was at the end. I was going to say a little bit about the special promo code if you buy direct, which is there are lots of us publishers.
Yeah.
But you're entirely right. And yes, Amazon should untangle itself any day now. But in the meantime, it'll take a while.
We haven't heard from Fahima Nocraschie yet.
Yeah. But yeah. If possible, it's easier for them.
Yes, yeah. I mean, and Anne-Elisabeth found some bookseller in Prague. Brilliant. So must visit.
And Budapest.
Well, Budapest, sorry.
Budapest. There's a wonderful international bookstore by an Alexandrian, among other things, Hungarian, Egyptian, Lebanese, Alexandrian. So really sort of extraordinary character. And when you next go to Budapest, Adel, first of all, you'll be happy to host something. And second, they might sell your book.
Oh, thank you.
It's the only good foreign language bookstore in Budapest, and it's called Bestsellers.
So someone
thank you.
Nice.
And it's got exactly books like yours, not what you think when you think bestsellers.
So thank you very much for that, because I think Adel forwarded that your message about bestsellers, and I've been in touch with the manager, who was very responsive and who said he'll get stock in. So thank you for that. I think, are we waiting for there's a question possibly?
Did Fahima a question from Fahima there? Nocraschie.
Possibly we might circle back to Fahima. Then maybe the internet. And I know. Hooky, you were next.
I'll wait till after Fahima. Yeah.
Fahima, you might have to unmute yourself, I think.
No.
No?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yes.
All right. As you see, my name is Fahima Nocraschie, born Sarhang. I was born in Egypt and lived in Egypt. I am an Egyptian, but now almost 60 years in Germany. Not go to Cairo or Alexandria, which I love very, very much, as it is a part of our life in Egypt. As Egyptian, every year, 3 months in Alexandria at the beach and what. And over the years, have gone that the Bibliotheca Alexandrina was born. And now there are many friends from all over the world to this bibliotheca. I am the chair of the German friends, but in this bibliotheca you can find all the things you wanted to know from the ages. What I wanted to not only to say also, you mentioned Miss Cathy spoke very well and said all we think about, or I think about, and I want to have this book. Now you say it's in Amazon. I will get it because I didn't read it, but I am sure it's as I see now, or as I hear now, it is perfect in all over the world. In the bibliotheca, we have very once in the year a meeting from the friends. It's always in October. It's the anniversary of the building of the inauguration of the Biblioteca. You mentioned that what is going to be with Alexandria in a few years. Yeah, I hope that Alexandria will be will be always over there. But the climate change makes that the water is growing, and that's why they are making fortifications now. And it will stay all over the years. Perhaps in 1,000, it might be underwater like it was once. I want to say hello to everyone who is now with us.
Thank you.
It's nice that you are interested in Alexandria, and not only in Alexandria but also in Egypt. And I am very proud of my Egypt now. They are the crowded people is one of the things which I don't like, but what to do? We can't stop it very soon. We hope that it will be perhaps there is somebody else who wants to speak. I'm going to make now. So this.
Max, could I jump in and stir it up a bit politically, perhaps?
Yes, absolutely.
Adel, you said that sometime that NASA was made, well, you've said a lot about NASA, but also you said that the Anthony Eden.
I didn't speak about NASA because I personally don't like NASA.
Well, Adel makes quite a point that he had quite an influence on Alexandria in a fairly malign way. But you also make the point that Eden was much misunderstood and that historians have been unkind to him. Now,
yeah,
I think even in Britain, that sounds a fairly provocative thing to say, because he's generally rated as one of the worst prime ministers this country ever had. Why do you think he was misunderstood, and where do you think the British relationship went wrong with Egypt, apart obviously from invading Egypt?
No, I love Egypt. I love Egypt.
Well, on
but,
I mean,
not the politic of Nasser. I didn't like it.
Yeah,
I've spoken specifically about it. When the officers, when the Western intelligence, there were two major or three or four intelligence interested in that period. The German intelligence is integrated after World War II, although a lot of Nazis escaped to Egypt and living in Egypt under different names. There's another book that Max is doing coming soon this period. Yeah, the other intelligence, of course, the French have always been there, but the British and the Americans were the ones who became early in the day aware of the officers plotting there to stage a coup. The Americans wanted actually to deal directly. I interviewed Kermit Roosevelt, I interviewed Miles Copeland, I read the book, and obviously the documents have been released under 30 and 50 years rule and so on. And they, when they met the officers, they said, oh, we can deal with these people. They are not like the Latin American colonels. They can deal with them. They looked up to America and so on. At the same time, the British intelligence were also working with another section with the officers there because the fallout between King Farouk and Al-Wafd, the government, and the British were over Sudan. They wanted to amend the 1936 treaty, which actually the British pulled out of Egypt with the 1936 treaty. And the sticking point is Sudan and Egypt were one country, with the Kingdom of Egypt and Sudan. And the British wanted the Sudan to be separated and have their own independence and so on. And that was the sticking point. So the officers agreed when Anthony Eden was the foreign secretary to give up Sudan when they staged the coup and succeed. And that was the understanding between Colonel Nasser and between the agreement again was mentioned in secret talks, and then they signed something with the memorandum understanding. It was not a treaty. The Egyptians called it Ittifaqiyya, which is an accord. Evacuating the Suez Canal basin 20 years, and that falls into the felt actually stabbed in the back, and my grandfather and my father, my uncle, who I give the details of the night and National Suez Canal. I moved between the two scenes, between number 10 Downing Street and between the after dinner in my house when the grown-ups were talking about it. And the word was that they saw Eden as a great patriot and he's a friend of Egypt. But I think Eden's error was A, to trust the French, and B, is actually he wasn't very much aware how much the French had actually agreed with the Israelis to involve them as an excuse there. But the biggest mistake was trying to hoodwink the Americans. And prior to that, Nasser was actually frustrating all the British efforts actually to help Egypt and assist Egypt. And that's why I'm not sort of defending Eden's mistakes, but he wasn't that sort of monster who destroyed. And I think there's a lot of a spin put by Anthony Nutting and people like Lord Kilmore then, because Selwyn Lloyd, when I interviewed him, he actually told me different story. Obviously, he was much older at the time when I interviewed him. But when the documents were released, and when I saw the American reports that been reported to the State Department, it tallied with the Selwyn Lloyd story than Kilmore and Anthony Nutting's story. And that's why this story is not told in the British sort of public discourse more and more to actually make understanding why Eden did what he did. As I said, he cannot be forgiving for trying sort of to act without the Americans, because what actually gave Nasser that momentum to control the region is that mistake, and General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, coming to his aid and turning him into a hero, and the rest is history. I mean, perhaps they're liaising with the Americans. I mean, in fact, General Naguib, President Naguib, told me that even before the landing in Port Said happened, Colonel Nasser sent his men. They arrested President Naguib, blindfolded his eyes, put him in garden of the dog, drove him in the desert somewhere not to be seen. And he told me that way back in 1982. He said Nasser was convinced that the British will actually come and they will hold an election, and Naguib would stand for election and he would be elected and people will reject Nasser. So there's a lot of stories, a lot of documentation that's been not told in the public discourse that would not exactly exonerate Eden, but would have another light on Eden and understanding his role and where is he coming from.
Thank you.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
I think Hookie wants to say.
Hookie was about. Sorry, Hookie.
Yeah, Max mentioned that a book on Farouk is coming up. I can't resist a very small anecdote. My wife and I had a good friend, an Alexandrian friend called Nadia Shazli, who I have a nasty feeling has passed on because our exchange of emails has ceased since around the end of last year. And years ago, my wife and I visited her in Alexandria, it must be 10 years ago. She was the widow of a commander of the Egyptian Navy. And she took us on board the yacht in which King Farouk had sailed into exile. I think it's called the Mahsura. Mahrusa. Yeah. And at that time, it was in effect the flagship of the training in the Egyptian Navy. And we had the most superb banquet on board because she obviously still had influence with her husband's force. But as I say, I'm afraid I've got a nasty feeling she's passed on. I've been unable to find out. That's my anecdote.
Yeah, she was Nadia Shazli, and she contributed quite a great deal to some studies into RUSI, Royal United Service.
Yes, I reviewed the book she wrote on the tanker war.
Yes, exactly, the tanker war, especially here. And she was quite helpful when I was actually working for the Independent at that time, covering the Iran-Iraq war at the time, and she was quite expert on the tanker wars there.
Fascinating. Can I take there's a pause there to mention, we've also got with us Vyvyan Kirvoss, who's the author of a book coming out next month, which is Nazis on the Nile.
Nazis on the Nile.
An expose of what exactly happened after the war to a whole load of very distinguished and experienced military commanders of good and bad ilk, I suppose. But I don't want to hijack Adel's event, but I just thought as we were on the subject of that.
No, I mean, I welcome Vyvyan there. I mean, there's actually a section of the book which we didn't mention yet, which is the late President Sadat and his group of friends during World War II, when they had some Nazi sympathizers, and one of the people I talked to was actually the pilots who organized, which actually the movie, there was about 5 or 6 different films made on this group of what they used to call them, I forgot the name they used to call them now, the radical or the left-wing radical imperialists or something like that. They were all rich, Count al-Mazi, and the story of the English patient. And it's a true story based on a group of Nazi sympathizers, Egyptian pilots, wanted to fly the chief of staff of the Egyptian army with the Allied war plans to meet Rommel in the Libyan desert and give the plans to the Germans, but the plane fell down, and one of the officers, actually the story of the film based on one of the officers there. So there's, but at that time there was actually split in Egypt who wants to support the Nazi as sort of anti-British, but the Wafd, which is the largest ruling party, the most popular party, was actually a friend of the British, L'Anglais. And that's why Miles Lamson, whom wrote a huge book, and I met his late widow, Lady Lamson, and used to go into her house in Sari, and she would make us molokhia and bamia and Egyptian dishes and all of that. And that's why he forced King Farouk to appoint Al-Wafd, their government there, because it was very wide, because that's the only party that would carry the Egyptian public opinion. Because at that time, although the Egypt should have declared war on Germany according to the 1936 treaty, but the Maher Pasha government was actually refusing to get involved in the war unless Italy or Germany attacked Egypt. which actually 3 months after he said that, the Italians started bombarding Alexandria, and then the Luftwaffe started air raids on Alexandria. But during that period, I also actually have all this group of officers sitting in the Kit Kats, where that dancer called Hekmat Fahmy was actually the ringleader of the German spies in Cairo. So it's maybe Vyvyan can tell us more about it in his book when it comes out to read it. But it's quite a fascinating section there. And when Tobruk fell into the Germans, so the newspaper man's coming to this nightclub, selling the newspaper, and it says, Tobruk has fallen. And then Sadat orders champagne for everybody there to, and it just gives you the idea of a second lieutenant in the Egyptian army who can afford to order champagne for everyone at the nightclub. So they must have been really well paid at that time. So there's another, so it's quite a lot of stories there. And speaking of dancers, I'm also writing about how the Egyptian used to hold the Miss Mayo, and then came Miss Bikini on sort of, and that's how Egypt was actually. That was Cairo, Alexandria. We telling the story of how the mosque vicars, mosque imams, started feeling a little bit uneasy because the young ladies and women would come in the two-piece, not exactly bikini, but this two-piece costume, they called it bikini, was coming out of the beach, and this several beaches had mosques next to them. So we're having the Friday prayer, and this young lady coming either in maillot or in two-piece costume there, passing as people going down and praying there. And that was, nobody would bat an eyelid until the 1958, 59. They started sort of complaining and whinging about distracting the good faithful while they are praying. So there was a new magazine being launched called Al-Gil Jadid, the new generation. And to have publicity, they started a competition among fashion designers to design al-mayo al-shari, the Islamic mayo. And I can't remember who was, some Hollywood actress, and Carlo Ponti and Kulthum, and two clergy from Al-Azhar, and two Egyptian feminist writers were all in the judges, and the two pieces became one piece, and they sort of became less exposing of the upper part, you know, less forward, so you don't show much cleavage. And suddenly it became the Islamic mayo, and the two clergymen were actually photographed clapping in what they as accepting that is the Islamic mayo. So that's how much Alexandria and Egypt moved in 50 years.
Fantastic. Well, good. I mean, unless there's any other last
There's some
comments?
people saying it's not. Oh, Vyvyan wants to say something.
Well, I'd love to say just a very quick word. One hesitates to say anything really, Adel, after your knowledge and your first-hand experience of these events is so heavyweight. You know, you put your head in the lion's mouth to really say anything about it. And what I've done is really quite specific and quite narrow in many respects. And I've plundered the files of the British official records of 1949 to sort of 1967 in what the British were doing in Egypt, and the CIA files. And one of the chapters I haven't read, I'm ashamed to say, all of your book, but I've read a number of chapters of your book, and extraordinarily, you know, it's an amazing account of a great sort of scope of things. But I thought I might ask you, given that we're here, a question about the chapter you've included in your book about the Jewish population of Alexandria. And well, it's the fullest account I've read of the events probably of November the 1st, 1956 to November the 5th or 6th, 1956, and what actually occurred to the Jewish population in Alexandria, some of whom you obviously knew personally and had known since you were a child. And you you recount in great detail the real horror of the events that unfurled over these days. And I mean, that's super interesting to me in itself, and I want to thank you for that. But my question really centers around what your own experience was, or your own where your own investigative skills led you to in looking at those events, and what the connection was, if there was any, you could find between what the government, the Ministry of the Interior was doing, and whether there was a connection with any of the German advisors to the Ministry of the Interior, and the architecture that, as far as I'm concerned, they helped construct in this official part of the government's kind of activities over that time. Were you able to make any connection at all between what the Ministry of the Interior was doing and whether there were any German connections or former Nazis involved in setting it up?
I take it from the last and move forward.
Sorry, it's rather involved.
Sorry, from the last question and move to beginning of the question. From the last part of the question, I found that in my later research, because my father and his friends were trying to calculate, I mentioned that in that chapter, the exact number of Jews actually who were deported left. I mean, the people who know personally who were rounded up and arrested in the days immediately in November 1956, and the ones who were Anglo-French were deported within 48 hours, straight away. And the Jews were rounded up. They were released later. It's not as bad as the 6-Day War. The 6-Day War, even the indigenous Egyptian Jews, the Koreans, who been there since sort of Cleopatra's time. They had two quarters in Alexandria. They were rounded up in after the 6-Day War, and they stayed in some camps.
Right.
I wouldn't say
very contested. These camps are very sort of contested history, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, there's actually there was one book, but written by someone written in French about her father's own experience in one of those camps.
Okay.
And he didn't come out, but that was sort of in the early 1960s. But these ones, including the brother of the late famous Egyptian singer Laila Murad, the songstress and the actress. But going back to 60s, so my father and his friends were trying to figure out from the published figures and the people they knew personally. So, for example, if you happen to be born to Italian family and Jewish, so they counted you as Italian, not as an Egyptian Jew. So that's how the figures are totally confused. So when the official figures of the people who were deported or forced to leave Alexandria between 1956 and the 6-Day War were 100,000, my father and his friend put the figure into between 180 to 250,000.
So because very much higher.
Because of this confusion. Now, the people like Victor Nahmayas, for example, who is actually the head of the Arabic section in the Israeli radio and TV, who is born in Mansoura, so he's Egyptian. He had no other nationality, so he was giving a passport valid only for one travel. So many other families, the man in the white shark skin suit, she wrote that story. Again, they had no other nationality, so became refugees. See? So these ones, they were counted because they had no other nationality, but there was confusion. That's why when we started to search on the method, because my father and his friends, what he did, they would say, here are the official figures. We know this 100 people. Out of these 100 people, how many we know personally who should be cast as Alexandrian Jews who were deported and who were forced to leave? And the figure came that disparity, you should actually make it between 80% extra to a double. Again, there's no scientific way of finding out because that's experience of two others. Now, the connection with the Nazi advisor did exist there. On the way, you see the change, the Orwellian change of language into making the past fit the present. So the advice that Nasser giving to go to the Arabic nation was almost like Hitler saying, if you're going to walk into Central Europe, all the German-speaking nations in Czechoslovakia and in Austria and so on would hail you as their leader. So that is a German idea. That he didn't come up with this himself. So I found that on the method of actually targeting the Jews in a subtle way. I read the story in the book of our neighbor who had his goldsmith shop sort of being attacked when the police didn't turn up for several hours. So you got these little things, or you get the phone calls that would actually come for harassment. So that was all these methods which indicate this German influence. Obviously, the Egyptians wouldn't admit into that. Later on, their presence in the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Propaganda, which is called Wizrat al-Irshad, with the word I'lam came later, headed by Haeckel. Before him, Dr. Hatem. You can see their fingerprints on that. The final point I want to make about the account I make of the Colonel Nasser speech on the 1st of November, 1956, after the Anglo-French ultimatum of separation of Egyptian and Israeli forces. Because people accuse Sadat of he's the one who started Islam in Egypt. I'm saying no, actually. Islam existed there as a force either inside internal Egypt, resisted by modernity, resisted by Alexandria. But Nasser nationalized the religion because Nasser, in that speech, he could have said the speech from his office, from Abdin Palace, from the TV, from Parliament, from the square in Alexandria, where he nationalized Suez Canal. No, he chose the mosque. He did not say Viva Egypt or Tahya Masr even once. He mentioned Allahu Akbar 14 times.
Right.
So he never actually said, long live Egypt or we'll fight for Egypt. So it was actually nationalization of religion, of saying, I'm leading the Muslim Orient against the Judo-Christian West. While in fact, the Jews actually in the synagogues, Egyptian Jews, were condemning the Israeli action. It's actually on record. You had Greeks and Italians who went to Port Said, including Italian Jews, into Port Said to fight against the British and the French. So all of that was actually reported, but then Nasser was only talking as a Muslim and addressing Muslims. So that's sort of my observation of that.
Well, it's amazingly interesting. I will thank you so much for taking that on. There's loads I could ask you, but
no, thank you, Ajay. Because it's personal, I didn't want to dwell much on it, but if you brought it up, thank you for bringing it up.
No, it's a super interesting book. I haven't read it in a linear way. I've dipped into it and read chapters here and there.
With a good thing on Kindle, you can do a word search. Thank you.
So
I think there's Wassim Aziz wants to say something.
Yeah, we probably should begin to think about winding it up because some people, but I know everyone loves the subject. We did, I think, first in the question was this gentleman, Wassim Aziz.
Yeah, he's Australia. I think he wants to speak.
Hello, people. And my apologies for being in bed because it's like after midnight here in Melbourne.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
And one thing I would like to say, I adore Adel. I love
thank
Adel.
you, Chico. Thank you.
Because he reminds me, I left Alexandria 31 years ago. And I'm coming from my mum's family. They are Greek Egyptians, like they were born in Egypt. And I've got a lot of Greek connections and I go to Greece every year. But because of the time now, it's after midnight, I'm not going to ask a very deep political question or reflect on something in the book because I haven't read anything in the book as yet. But I would like to ask Adel, where were you, where did you live in Alexandria?
Where did I live?
Yeah, where did you live in Alexandria?
We had three homes. We had our villa in Rue 19 in Sidi Besh, which is now knocked down like all the villas, and instead of it's about 4 high-rise blocks, about 18 houses. You know, another monument to ugliness. And we had what you used to call Wikala, which is in Muharram Bay. It's actually French style building, although it's built actually by an Italian architect, but it's actually French style. Room Muharram Bay, where you can in fact drive inside, and it's just a big courtyard and go around it. And so I had one of this apartment, like about 8 rooms, and we children used to open all the doors, run through around it. So we used to spend some time the winter there. And although my mother preferred us to be, especially on the festive season, which starts from Hanukkah and we go until mid-January, because the Christmas in Egypt, with 2 Christmases, the Catholic Christmas in December and the Orthodox Christmas.
Orthodox on the 7th.
7th of January. So it go until the mid-January. So we had all this season. So my mother preferred to be in Sidi Bishr Villa because it's quieter. But we would love to be there because of all the lights and festivities going and so on. But also we had my grandfather duplex flat on sort of a big building just behind the box in Manshia. And Manshia is the center, the first part of Alexandria was named after Mancini, who is an Italian architect who designed the Muhammad Ali Square. Used to be the consulate square there. So we had the 3 apartments moving in between.
I can relate to all of that because I'm born in Rou Fouad.
Yes.
40 Rou Fouad, exactly. My dad had an apartment in Rou 15 in Sidi Besh and Kabina there as well. And my grandparents, the Greek ones,
Okay, Ruma Moon is with Villa Ambron, where Lawrence Darrell lived. And where King Victor Emmanuel stayed when he was sort of exiled, and where all the artists and sort of big names met there. And the Philistines, with corruption, someone bought it, knocked it down, built another monument to Agnes.
Very nice to meet you, Adel.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think Cathy wants to say something.
Thank you very much.
The documentation, the political and the historical with Nasser, with Eden, Churchill, it's so beautifully documented from chapter 42 up to almost 55. And the description that Monsieur Adel gives of Sadat being the camoléon. And just a little note on the psychological level and the sociological level, because honestly, the book has many layers, just as Alexandria, as you mentioned it. This is why I think it should be taught. The psychological, he mentions, and it's very, very true, just 1 second, in the very beginning, and he says, give me 1 second. I'll write a thesis. I've got all the notes. Honestly, I mean, amazing. I finished the book, the Kindle, of course, because I'm waiting for my signed hardcover. I finished it in 2 dawns and 1 evening. So, and he says how the children are affected by one never forgets the fragrance from childhood days. It often massaged my senses' memory. And this is true, because when he mentioned this, and before communicating with Monsieur Adel on Facebook, I just jotted exactly this when I read the title of the book. It reminded me, the cover is the district where I was born, in Stanley, in Bulkley. And we had this villa, and I could still smell, I still do actually every morning, that the jasmine and the jasmine garlands, which later on you give details in an opening chapter. And then the other thing is the way Monsieur Adel dresses. I feel the influence of your grandfather on you. At the end of chapter 33, which I did write to you about, when you say you looked at those gentlemen at the mirror and you wondered if you will look at them from a faraway country. And this is you looking at yourself. So the analysis, I mean, really, it has so many levels. You want to look at it from the historical level. It's all there in 13 chapters with excellent documentation. And as he himself mentioned, things which are still not, known in public, with all his prolific, journalistic and historical research. And you want to look at it from historical level. It's the identical book, which I think only a true Alexandria will understand, because, as I said, he takes you through all these different places, even though many I haven't witnessed myself, but I could see my family, and from the stories, my mother and my grandmothers and my aunts, it's there, and the very actual ones. And then with the description of the district where I live, well, I still, when I go to Egypt, I own a flat after the villa was demolished, and I've sent Mr. Adel the monstrous concrete that came out of a wonderful villa, and the awful color it has been painted now in, and it's unrecognizable. This beautiful area is unrecognizable. And now I moved, when I go to Egypt, I'm in the UK, in Saraya. And again, he describes, which is the annex to Sidi Bishr, and you describe those two guns of Navarone, which are no longer there. And Petro, the Casino Petro, again, I don't live far from there, and now it's another monstrous. So it's multi-layered. The book is multi-layered. You can look at it, it depends on one's interest, from which angle you want to see. So again, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much. I think, unless there's anybody else, maybe, I'm sure you'll all stay in touch with Adel, and if you can share, I can share the emails, I think, or do contact Adel.
Yeah, if anyone wants to think, I wrote my email there on the text messages. So if anyone wants to email me, my email
definitely
address,
like you to sign my book, if we can.
Yeah, are you in London? Are you in London?
Yes, I'm in London. Yes.
Oh, yeah, well, definitely.
Yeah. I'd love to get you to sign and talk to you about it, actually. So.
Okay, wonderful.
Could we suggest, if possible, and if any of us is in London at any time, a sort of get together up here, several of us together with Adel?
Oh, I would love to. I'd love to. You'll be my guest.
That'd be wonderful.
I have just I've lost a small studio in London, and I've acquired a club which is the Royal Overseas League, and I would be very happy to organize something in the garden.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, well, whenever you are here, we will be here.
What a lovely idea, and lovely to be joined from as far away as Melbourne, and from the French-speaking world, and let me just thank everybody for taking part. The book will be imminently visible on Amazon. It's visible, but I think they're just sorting out their database, and it'll be there. But in the meantime, if you buy direct from the publisher, more goes to the author and the publisher. Amazon absorb everyone's money, so most publishers have a thing about that.
I'm not sure for Amazon.
Jeff Bezos.
If you do go direct to our website, which the link is there, and put in Alex-10, you'll get a 10% above what already the 10% that's already on there. So what a bargain, hey. Thank you very much again, everybody, for joining us, and please stay in touch.
Thank you so much. That was really,
Thank you, Max.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Mark.
Bye-bye.
Love to